when you have limited resources, you act sustainably. You minimize the waste. Hello and welcome to the Multilingual Content Podcast, where experts discuss international content management, product localization, and global expansion. I'm Caterina from Undertow, and today our founder, Nicola will be talking to Veronica DiMartino, who leads the localization team at Eventbrite. In this episode, we will explore the challenges of prioritizing localization efforts when resources are tight, a reality many face in the fast-evolving world of global expansion. Veronica will share her strategies for effectively managing limited resources, fostering creativity, and applying sustainable practices to support long-term growth in global markets. So, without further ado, let's dive in.
Hi, Veronica, and welcome back again to the Multilingual Content Podcast. How are you today?
Hi, Nicola. Thank you for having me back. It's a pleasure to be here again. I'm really well, thank you. How are you?
Oh, really good, actually. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. And we're going to talk about, let's say, a tough topic, how to prioritize with limited resources, which is something that unfortunately happened, I think, to everybody that has to manage localization. But before we jump into that, would you mind just introducing yourself a little bit for anybody who just tuned in for the second part of this conversation?
Sure. So my name is Veronica, and I lead the localization team at Eventbrite. Basically oversee the end-to-end localization process at Eventbrite, looking at global strategies for global expansion and just like our general transition localization framework.
Okay, I think that's quite gives an idea, like all the different responsibilities that you have.
And it's very limited, but there's definitely more to it. But
yeah. And so let's start from the very beginning. So we're talking about prioritizing with limited resources. So imagine a scenario where resources are limited. What factors do you consider when deciding which projects or tasks to prioritize?
Yeah, so I think just to kind of normalize this specific scenario, I think it's a challenge that a lot of companies go through. And it can be depending on different factors. It might be maybe a seasonal change in your business. It might be an internal restructure, an acquisition is happening. And so there are various factors that can cause the limit in resources. I think the first step would be to kind of look at what you have available in front of you at the moment. So look at what is your status quo, what is your starting point, and then from there start expanding. So get a sense of your current situation and see what resources you do have available right there in front of you. And then from there, I think kind of look at your goals and what you want to do with what you have available in front of you. I think the challenge is to find a balance between what is a stretched goal and make sure that you're not overstretching yourself and, kind of setting yourself for failure where you actually don't have resources. So always leave a little bit of room for overstretching your goals, but also be mindful of what you can do with what you have, basically, being realistic at the same time. Also, try not to lose the focus on the bigger picture and how you ideally want this initiative to land on and what's the end goal, basically. Maybe also look at beyond what's, I guess the next step would be look beyond where you are right now. So how would you like this to be in 18 months from now, for example? And then from there, even though you don't have the resources that you need right now to be where you want to be in 18 months, at least it gives you a good idea of a starting point and as well as where you want to get. Also, I think another very, very good helpful skill is just get creative. Get creative with the resources that you have. Reach out to people that might not necessarily be from your same field, from your same team, but they might still have valuable opinions and helpful ideas to, just inform your strategy. And so reach out when you're feeling stuck and when you feel these are the only resources that I have and there's not much more that I can go, I'm hitting a wall. Reach out, expand your vision, reach out and look for somebody else that maybe can expand or unlock an idea that you haven't reached yet.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, when we do Undertow, we recommend looking at the complete customer experience at different steps of their journey and see, and then like every touch point and every part of the, let's say they get in touch with the app with this function, they get an onboarding email, they go on the website, they speak with a sales rep, and then break it down in like stuff that you definitely need to have so they can actually go through the whole journey. And then the stuff that you want to have, but it can be like, you can take it back and do it like afterwards. Stuff that it would be nice to have, but you can live without it, and stuff you definitely don't need to do that. You don't have to. And that helps a little bit. Then still like, to figure out then how to split it and how to start addressing it. But I think it helps a little bit to have an idea of what you said, like having an idea where you want to go, what's the end goal. And then you can, let's say, split it out and see, okay, this stuff is the very essential one. We're going to focus on this, and then we tackle that.
Yeah, kind of like,
gonna be
a macro level, and then kind of like cut it in bite size. Okay, like if I want to be there in 18 months, what is the very first micro achievement, kind of like very first small win that I can go for, that I can start moving towards, and also like celebrate those small wins and those small achievements. It makes so much difference in validating what you're doing, make you feel good and proud of what you're doing, especially when you have very limited resources. It really makes you or your team feel like you're really bringing value to the initiative, and also like boosts the confidence level in what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, that idea is like what we call the minimum viable experience. It's based on the minimum viable product that you have in product development. So that's the same goal. Like you have a minimal part, you start with that, and it's easier to achieve, and it boosts your confidence to keep going. Because otherwise, if it's like too big, you start with a piece and you feel all over the place. Yeah.
Easy to get lost. Yeah.
And when you like looking at, you have a conflicting priorities, how do you balance, for example, short-term needs, like stuff that you need right now, and long-term strategic goals, like something that it's going to be, as you said, like, for example, in 18 months, how do you balance that? Is there any like recommendation you will give about this?
Yeah, I think looking at what your service or your product is doing at the moment and where, so especially in the case of like localization and global expansion, look at kind of like global landscape and see if your service or your product has already some sort of like organic presence somewhere. And maybe users are already using your platform in English and you don't even know. Maybe there was like a word of mouth of some sort of recommendation-based organic flow and your product is already reaching this market in a very organic way. And then from there, explore, okay, this is kind of like a low-hanging fruit. Let's go there and let's kind of like understand what sort of value is my product bringing to these people that they're already using my platform or my service in English? And how can I make that even better? How can I optimize that? How can I improve that and make it like a more local, relatable experience for them so that, they're already using us. They're already like a customer, basically. And we want to make that experience even better. So start from those low-hanging fruits, like we were saying, and then from there, it kind of like also informs what your next steps will be. I think a very important factor to keep in mind is how sustainable your strategy is. Like how much of what you have already, especially when you have very limited resources, how much of what you have already can be reused, can be reapplied. And actually, the more you do this and the more you apply this principle, the quicker you can enter a market, for example, or the more scalable, operations also can be. So say, for example, you're launching one market and you're going through all these like roadblocks or different customer requirements and needs. Once you finally go through that, like first rocky patch, when you're ready to go to your second, third, fourth country and like you're launching new markets, that previous experience has so much value and makes your path ahead much easier, lighter, quicker. And so, yes, when you have limited resources, making sure that you have a sustainable way of operating and document as much as you can all your operations, share your documents, make it like a shared documentation hub. And also maybe write a playbook down. These are the first guidelines that we use when we launched into our new market. And then the next year you go back to it and you kind of like already have a foundation. You already have your groundwork laid out so that when you're going to the next market, you kind of already have an idea of what has worked well, what needs to be improved. And yes, you always need to keep in mind cultural nuances and different customer behaviors according to which market you go in. But so much of that knowledge that you already have that is valuable and can be reapplied. And so, yeah, what do you do when you have limited resources? You act sustainably. You minimize the waste, right? And this applies in everyday life.
Yeah, I mean, it makes absolute sense because something, especially now with the AI like being widespread, some people might think I have limited resources, so I'll just enter 10 markets at once or 20 or 40 just by translating with AI. And that's not really viable because even if you get somehow some traction, which is all to be seen, to be honest, like if you just translate everything with AI, but let's say you even might get some traction, you don't have the whole operation to support it in their market because just going out like this, you have no previous data. You don't have like even sometimes organizational structure inside to support that. Let's say you don't have a customer support team in place because you cannot have like hire 40 people right away if you have limited resources. So that means you might get some initial traction, just lose it and burn it like that, those chances, because you didn't have like a proper way. And I like it, the fact that you enter maybe a couple of markets, you get those data. I love the idea of the playbook, absolutely. And then try to refine it with the next market and then the next market. And that's definitely more sustainable. It might take more time, but it's a more lasting results, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because
and you need to consider like a longer investment or a long level of effort to start with, even for those kind of like low-hanging fruits, let's say. But then again, sustainable means slow and steady. It's difficult, or it's rare that you get it right at the first go. You get it right and quickly at the first go. So also kind of like leave room for, like you said, those refinement operations when you're ready to go to the next, to launch your next country. And again, also what you said is, yes, it depends on what level of quality you're expecting and what sort of adoption or conversion you are aiming for in the markets that you launch in. Maybe launching everything with the AI at one go might not be the best way to achieve top quality, but technology is your friend these days, especially. So it might be one way to do things. It doesn't mean that everybody has to follow one way or another. It might be one way to do it. It might be that a different market reacts in a positive way to AI, maybe because cultural nuances weren't so important there, and AI is okay for it's all right for extraction-based content, or like where you don't necessarily need to add the human connection or like element to your content. And maybe there might be other countries that show a lot of resistance instead, and that also informs your strategy forward. It would tell you that, yes, I don't know, Canada is okay with AI, while France needs a lot more care and customization. Just kind of like a couple of examples.
Yeah, it makes sense. And if you're like doing that, like going into too many markets at once, you're spreading yourself too thin, so you cannot like really follow how each one is going if you're just basically spraying and praying. So yeah, absolutely makes sense. And I mean, AI, what I meant is like, absolutely, AI is a tool and we use it every day. It's just, it cannot replace a proper strategy and a structured approach to going to market. Yeah.
It's an aid. It's a good helper these days. It's not a replacement. It's a helper.
Oh yeah, we definitely don't want to go back like to pen and paper. So
there you go, right?
For the typewriter, we're fine with computers. Yeah.
Yes, please, let's keep the automations going.
And can you tell us maybe a personal experience? This is like a project or a specific case where you were in a resource constrained environment, like you had limited resources, and what strategies did you apply in that case to overcome those limitations?
Yeah, actually, I had a very close to the heart kind of personal experience when it comes to operating with very limited resources. I think after the pandemic, a lot of tech companies were struggling with like sustaining their business. And unfortunately, there were a lot of restructure and internally. And this means, unfortunately, losing resources, and they were allocated to do different roles. And at that point, I also was basically going from having a full-on team with lots of resources internally and in local countries with like full-on structured team from general managers in each countries and product marketing managers and salespeople in each one of the countries to re-centralize resources basically at a minimum level, because the nature of the business and what it was going through during COVID. And so at that point, I went from having full on super support structured teams around me to basically become an individual, like the only localization individual left in the company. And so you imagine like you have all these processes in place where you have like 20, 30 people looking after each one of their areas of expertise, to basically having everything now under my solo drive and having to understand, okay, why can I keep on versus what do I need to deprioritize? What is important to the company, to the business, and me? And really, how can I kind of like be creative and stretch myself a little bit without going completely crazy and overwhelm myself? So it took a lot of kind of like time and evaluation in understanding what operations I was able to keep up basically by myself. And I have to say one of the things that really helped me the most was relying on external relationships. So our language service providers, our vendors, the partnerships that we had with our translation management systems, because obviously having worked with them for many, many years, the relationship was really strong, really solid. There was a lot of trust. They actually were able to absorb a lot of the work that our internal teams were doing before. And obviously, yes, you need to be at a level of trust and strong relationship to make sure that you can hand on a little bit of your work to the right people. But I'm so thankful for the way that our language service providers, the partnerships that we have, our translation management tools were supporting me. And I really felt cared for and supported. And there was a lot of outreach from them towards me. So I think definitely lean on relationships when you're feeling a little bit lonely and limited. Lean on your relationships and just also like look at what's going on out there in sense of what other companies are going through your same experience doing. Maybe there might be a forum of other localization individuals that are going through the same challenge that you are, that they might have good tips and good advice. And also, when then regrouping and gathering again inside your own team, I think what really works well is find a common ground, find a shared goal that you can communicate with the people that are in your company, even though they're not necessarily in your team anymore, those stakeholders that you kind of like work with every day. And yes, you might be competing over resources allocation, you might be competing over budget, you might be competing over a lot of different dependencies. But at the end of the day, you work in the same company. So you need to have a shared goal. You need to be able to communicate a shared goal and find the common ground and communicate that the bigger vision is at the benefit of everybody, basically. So yeah, it's a fine balance to find. But I think if you have the right relationships, especially, you can make it work.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I like the fact about looking communities of people in a similar situation. Some other people might have gone through a similar experience beforehand, and they might have, might have advice. I think that's a really great suggestion. And about connecting to suggestions, like if you were to imagine you're speaking with a product manager or a marketing manager that had never managed localization before, they are handed this function right from the start. Nobody else in the company knows how to do this. And they have actually to start out, and obviously they have limited resources because it's a new function as well within the company. What kind of advice would you give them? Like, how do you think they should start or get around like prioritizing and understanding from where to start?
Yeah. So I think number one, define your priorities. What are your priorities? Because people sitting at the same table, they might belong to the same team, but they might have actually different priorities. Because at the end of the day, we're all looking kind of like at in our own little bubble, working at our own little projects. And so we might have different priorities. So sit down with the people that you work with or your stakeholders or even like an executive level and define what are your priorities to start with, then your team priorities, and then your company priorities. So kind of like start small and then keep expanding. So define your priority, your individual priorities, define your team's priorities and your company priorities. And then from there, identify common themes, identify maybe shared visions, shared goals, shared trends. Maybe there's something that both the localization team and the content design team is trying to achieve. And they just, because they were so focused in their own silo, working at their own project, They didn't know that actually they could share resources and get to the goal faster and quicker. So also, what do you do when you have limited resources? You share your resources, actually. You don't keep them for yourself. So I think, that's kind of like rule number one. And then from there, obviously communicate why those priorities matter and basically what kind of value you're trying to bring through achieving, those priorities. And another thing that really helps is foster a culture of accountability. So once you define what are your priorities, once you define where you want to go, keep each other accountable for it. That's a good way to keep track and progress of the little steps that you need to take to make sure that you can get to your priority and achieve your goals. So keep everybody in check. Keep asking about monitoring progress, tracking progress, and ask the same thing. Ask for feedback. Ask for, the people that you work with. Okay, keep me accountable on this. If by 2 weeks you see that I don't get back to you with an update, come and reach out again. So definitely keeping each other accountable helps. And obviously, like I said, leverage pre-existing tools that you might have, leverage pre-existing knowledge and experiences, even from folks around you, and use some sort of framework that helps give structure to all of this strategy. So like you said, for example, must have, priority, should have, could have, nice to have, don't need. Something that kind of keeps in, gives structure to what you're trying to reach. And then also keep some sort of flexibility, keep some sort of adaptability. The priorities change down the line. What you've set in stone at the beginning of the year, you reach H1, you reach halfway through the year, and your priorities change completely because now your customers want something different. So keep an open mind and even though you're set your priority, you kind of have an order and star that you're following, keep an eye out to make sure that those priorities make sense, still make sense to you, to your company, and to your customer at the end of the day eventually. And then I think, yes, not having resources available might be challenging, might be difficult, but it's also what ultimately builds resilience. And I think this is something that's probably a bit overlooked and not often spoken about. I think that teams that start small, that have very small resources, are often the most resilient one and are often the one that you can really rely on because they really had to kind of turn stones and really go through a lot of different creative processes to get to where they are. So it really builds resilience. And I think it also really unify teams when you kind of have a shared struggle and you rely on each other, you lean on each other a lot. And it creates a lot of resilience. And it's a really good skill to have.
I love it. I love the localization as the underdog that brings everybody together.
It happens so many times.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I love as well the fact that, as you said, you set your priorities, things change. That's the only constant, that things change. And so validate it throughout the year because it might still make sense, or maybe you need to change things around. And then, but I absolutely love it. The fact that collaboration between different departments, that's the bread and butter of localizations. Really, you touch a little bit on every department.
Yeah, so it's one of my favorite things. I love relationships. I love connecting people. My favorite thing is actually connecting people. And localization does that in a really good way.
And it's really good, and you learn always a lot of things because you get in touch with people with different backgrounds. Mm-hmm. It's you never end learning. Yeah, that's something I really like as well, yeah. I don't know if you have any other suggestion, before we wrap up, if you have anything else that we haven't talked about that you think will be really important when it comes to prioritizing the limited resources. Any final words? I
think one last piece of advice from my experience would be that having access to shared resources will always have some sort of risk, obviously. And keep that in mind as well. And understand what kind of risk is okay for you to tolerate versus what kind of risk needs to be mitigated and try to be avoided at all costs. So you only know, your product and your service, and you also kind of can try to understand and estimate the level of risk that you're ready to take on, basically. So sometimes maybe you enter in a market without having it all figured out. And like you said earlier, you're just launching a minimum viable product, but It's for the overall benefit of just launching your global expansion. It's the first building block, say, for example. And then it's basically in order to build greater stability in the future or expand your user base altogether. So maybe you launch in one market only in South America, and then all of a sudden, all the other neighboring markets start using your platform as well. So yeah, understand your risks and be ready to identify which one are okay to tolerate and be ready to take those risks, and be prepared for the ones that you really, really need to avoid and want to mitigate as much as you can.
I think that's a really good advice to close on. Thank you. Thank you so much for all your insights and sharing your knowledge.
Of course, it's been a pleasure. Really, thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us today. The Multilingual Content Podcast is powered by Undertow. We help companies translate their content into results. Get in touch if you want to know more. And if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episode. See you next time.